Hi everyone, Mike Ernest here, and welcome to our 3x3 podcast. Today we're going to be looking at those famous three business problems in three different ways. The first way is going to be, we'll answer it from a strategic standpoint. The second way we're going to answer the question is through more of a tactical, like really down in the weeds, what could we do today to address the question. And the third one is going to be more from a spiritual or self-development standpoint. And so every single week we get together, we observe through our client interactions, what are those three most interesting questions that more of a broader group of business leaders would want to hear about or could find value in. So again, these are our three questions for the week. The first one is kind of a classic. How do I generate more revenue? That's really by probably popular demand. And when we look at generating more revenue from a strategic standpoint, it's interesting to point out there are only three ways to grow revenue in any company of any sort. And it's nice to kind of simplify the world down in revenue generation down to something like that. And the first way is the most common that everybody thinks about, which is increasing the number of new customers. So that is your typical sales and marketing type of a strategy. The second way to grow revenues for a company is going to be by increasing the average ticket price. So the average ticket price really comes down to a combination of how many different items somebody is purchasing from you. It could be the price point, so raising prices could be a way of increasing the average ticket price. But it comes down to that overall scope of services that we're providing to customers. And then the third and final way that you can increase revenue for any company is going to be increasing the retention of that relationship. So how long do companies stay with you once they become a customer? And it's kind of wild, but again, that's it, those three ways. Increasing the number of customers, increasing the average ticket price, and increasing the retention of the customers. So from a strategy standpoint, those are your three buckets that you can play from. And so then what we'll do is we'll jump into the tactical way of looking at this. So let's just choose one of those and look at what does it look like from an execution standpoint. And so increasing the number of new customers, it's again kind of cliche, it's also the most expensive one. So when we look at helping organizations increase their revenue, we rarely look at increasing the number of new customers first. And then when we look at retention, that's a little bit of a fact of customer management and development, and it is a good one, but it's oftentimes not as actionable and provide as quick returns as the one in the middle, which is the increasing the average ticket price with customers. And the way to get after that particular area, oftentimes as practically as possible, gets into not necessarily raising your prices, because that's what everybody loves to talk about, but it's not so easily done. And matter of fact, a lot of times it's not even advised. But it comes down to how much are you doing for that customer? So it's the scope of services. And a lot of us have businesses where we can do more than one thing for a customer. Could be products, could be services. And so then you look at, okay, that all makes sense, but now how do you actually go do that? And the rubber hits the road in these types of interactions with customers that happen on this ongoing basis. A lot of times we think of them as account development meetings or check-ins or that type of thing. And the skill set is around how well do we investigate what their needs are. And so how well do we have like a needs assessment strategy, and how well do we do in that assessment strategy to really uncover what's going on with the customer, what are the issues they have that they'd like to have solved for. And even when I'm saying this out loud, it just sounds like so typical, but it's done so poorly so often. It'd be a good time to ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel you and your team do at really consistently engaging with your existing customers to find out how are things going, not only with your current set of services, but also those outliers or those additional services. What does that look like? How well can you, or how can you look at improving that type of engagement? So again, I'll leave it at that for right now, but that is a tactical way of going out and increasing revenues quite quickly. And then the third way of looking at this question is going to be more from that spiritual development standpoint. And from that standpoint, a question can be raised around your focus. Where is your mindset right now? Is it in the weeds of the challenges that can come from not having sufficient revenue, and so it's focused on the problems and the issues that are surrounding that? Or is the majority of your focus on how can I create more value for customers? How can I get more engagement with them? What are we doing that we could improve our overall relationships with our customers? Is that where the majority of your focus is? And oftentimes we get sucked into the first one, which is more around dealing with the problems, especially if you're the business leader of the company. But again, it's an interesting thing to be thinking about, especially when we think about it from the framework of we only have one tool we really get to use in business and in life, and that's our brain. And we get to choose if we assert that, with what are we focusing on and what are we doing with that focus. And so the question that we'll leave with you here on that question is, where is your focus? Is it on what do we do to make things better to generate more revenue, or is it things are not going as well as they should be, and that's really taking up a lot of my attention? Think about that as you go through the next day, and again, love to hear your comments on this. But hopefully that gives you a bit of a framework and a few different ways of looking at different options for increasing revenue with your company. Now, next one is around how do I hire better? I love this one. How do I hire better? We hear this all the time. And interestingly, from a strategy standpoint, I think the best way that I've found over 30 years to deal with this is really not to worry too much about the hiring, because as much as I read, as much as I try different types of tools, assessments, whatever, I really find that the hiring process still comes down to a fair amount of luck. But what I find is not full of luck, or is much more in my control, comes down to what do I do after they come into our work environment, and how quickly can I decide whether they are part of the team or need to be part of the team, or there isn't a fit. Said more bluntly, don't worry so much about hiring compared to the firing aspect of this. So let's look at this strategically then. It really is just making a decision going, okay, we'll do our best from a hiring standpoint, but where we're going to focus on being masterful is from the day they get in, what are we doing to support them to be successful? And then if they don't fit, then how do we move them out in a way that makes sense? So that would be the strategic answer. From a tactical answer, number 2, it comes down to or it can come into one area of documentation around a person's job description. Like, how good we typically refer to them as position result descriptions. How good is your position result description for the area that you're thinking about hiring into? Is it really set up for success? Does it really clarify what these people have to do to make things work out for them and for the company? Or is it a little bit more trial by fire and maybe some training from other colleagues? It's an interesting thing to think about. But one thing that you can absolutely affect is how clear are your expectations? How much documentation is there for them to learn and self-study on their own? And how clear does that success look like? All job descriptions really should come down to some simple KPIs. And if you don't have those KPIs identified in that position, odds are that it's going to be a little bit more tricky for you to make that diagnosis of, is this the right fit? Should these people stick in the organization? Is there a different part of the organization we need to evaluate for, or maybe there's not a fit at all? So hopefully that answers from the tactical standpoint. Now, in the spiritual way, how do we look at this from a self-development standpoint, from us and our personal improvement? I think one of the relevant things would be to ask yourself, what kind of leader are you? And where is your mindset now? I think we all can go through cycles, but for right now, when you're looking at this, are you coming from it from a standpoint of really selfishness? Meaning that the concept is, hey, listen, I'm paying this person to do a job, and they work for me. They need to come good. On that return on investment. Or do you look at it as, yep, I'm paying this person, obviously, to come in and spend their time with me, but it's really on me to pave the way for them to be successful. And so I'm going to give them every opportunity to be successful. I'm really, if anything, the dynamic is a little bit more of, I kind of work for them in some ways, and am I approaching it from that standpoint? that kind of selfless standpoint of, I'm here to help you be successful. And again, that doesn't mean that we ever back off that these people need to create a return on investment, for the money that we're paying them. But it's a difference in mentality of, are we there to support them to really be successful? Do we understand what makes them tick? Do we try to figure out how to provoke the best out of them? Or are we on the other side of that fence, which is really around, I pay you so that thus you owe me. And again, not saying that both, one is perfectly right or wrong, but I will say this, that over the last 30 years of me doing this, a lot of times what I found is people get a little stuck, maybe a little jaded if enough things go wrong. And sometimes it just helps to have a little bit of a wake-up call and just go, whoa, it's like, we're all human beings. We want to be successful. We want to help the people around us be successful. And sometimes we just get stuck into a mindset of selfishness, setting expectations, and maybe not supporting the people as much as they need to. So hopefully that helps address the how do I hire better standpoint or question. And then lastly, how do I keep going forward when I'm stuck in fear? This was a really interesting question that came up. And it came up, I think it made this podcast because it really was the profoundness of the moment. When this successful business leader, was just, kind of had this real moment of openness, and it just kind of almost caught us off guard in some ways. But it was truly a very authentic conversation and a question. And so I thought, although we don't hear this a lot, I think we feel it an awful lot. Matter of fact, in some ways, I'm going to guess we probably feel something like this all the time, every day. And we always need to be looking for ways of moving past whatever thought or whatever thing is holding us back. So let's take a look at it from a few different angles. The first one being strategy. So the strategy around this idea of fear and holding us back, one thing that we find is really helpful is being crystal clear and working on it the night before on what are the top 3 things that you really need to move forward with in the upcoming day. So what are those really strategic, important, they're probably even bigger than tasks, but they're these things that need to make forward progress tomorrow. And sitting and being mentally prepared for that the night before, so when you wake up, you have that clarity, you have that ability to get after things right away. Found that strategically can make a lot of sense. From a tactical standpoint, one way of addressing this is an interesting one, and that is really looking at the literalness of that fear. Meaning, fear is a feeling, it's a thought. Somewhere it's really a thought and a feeling combined at one time. And if we actually get all the way down into the weeds of that process of feeling that sense of overwhelm, that visceral type of a feeling that's inside ourselves, and if we have the discipline of just staying with that thought, just watching what happens to that thought, seeing how that thought feels inside of us, an amazing thing takes place. It dissipates. It doesn't stick around. And so, kind of like all of our other associative thoughts that go through our heads throughout the day, it really isn't that lasting. But it's a way of being a little more curious and realizing that, that acronym that they oftentimes use of fear, false evidence that appears real. It really is true in the sense that a lot of times we give a lot more respect to those feelings of fear than we ought to. And so this is a nice tactical way of approaching some of those things, some of those feelings that we get during the day, and not giving them as much weight, not giving them as much attention, getting a little more curious about, well, what is that really going on in my head, and how does that end up? Where does that go? And so try that if you haven't already. It's kind of a common practice in certain types of meditation. It's also just a plain smart business move if you feel like you're getting a little bit hampered, from that fear standpoint. And then the third way of looking at it from a spiritual standpoint really gets into the idea of ego versus being. We always talk about the being more of our essential self, our true selves, and then our egos oftentimes are this kind of persona that we put in front of the universe and we try to defend it, or we actually think it's kind of who we are. And spiritual people will oftentimes think of it, from a standpoint of the being is much more of that essence, and the ego is much more of this personality, if you will. And really what's happening in a lot of our fear is our personality is simply afraid of being judged. And most of the time it's being judged by family and friends, and it's a motivator and a type of slavery that is really hurtful for you. And to the degree that you can get more comfortable knowing that this is really just a reaction to a fear of being judged, and spending a little bit more time thinking about the value, of whether that even makes sense to spend a lot of time or give that a lot of credibility, would be a good set of questions and some contemplation to sit with for a while. So hopefully that helps on kind of that spiritual bend on this topic. But it's an important one, and it's a long practice, just like a lot of self-development things are. They kind of perpetually improve or grow for a period of time, we hope. So that wraps up our 3 questions and through our 3 different lenses. We hope that this podcast is providing you some insights and some value. And we also want to make sure that you feel comfortable reaching out to us. It's not just questions that come from our customers. Feel free to ask us questions. And again, if it feels like it's kind of got that interest, that quality, that frequency of a question, we'll be happy to put this up and address it in our 3 different ways. Thanks so much.